the incentives in the right direction to provide and deliver the outcomes that we want for our community.
Okay. Jimmy, you had also pulled this item number 30.
Yes, so, and 30 was, in a similar sense, wanted to understand, there was some public media narrative around what TXDOT had done and who knew what and when, and to kind of understand what TXDOT's responsibility is for their own property compared to this new additional spending that we're going to be taking on. I did have the opportunity to talk to Mr. Mendoza earlier, but I thought it was really important to let the public know that this is, in essence, an unfunded mandate on property that we don't get to dictate what occurs on that property because it's state property, but it is entirely on us to spend city taxpayer dollars to maintain it. So I kind of previewed everything, but Richard, if you would just explain a little bit.
Most certainly, Council Member. Thank you. Richard Mendoza, Director of Public Works. So what this contract is proposing is that we enter into a services contract with Workquest to provide debris management and cleanup services under 61 specific locations underneath underpasses and elevated freeways throughout the city. And as Councilmember Flanagan stated, previously this work was conducted by the District 7 office of TXDOT, which stretches approximately from Bastrop westward to Llano. And they have always viewed this work activity as elective work, and we are under a municipal maintenance agreement for those state right-of-ways that reside within our incorporated city limits. And their interpretation of that municipal maintenance agreement in regards to these specific locations is that they're responsible for litter and for vegetation control. They view this as work that they have been conducting as above and beyond that basic service. And so I had started conversations with them last summer to share sensitivity around this heightened level of health and safety issues being caused by some of these encampments, homeless encampments under these underpasses, and shared with them that we had desire made for a couple of these specific locations if we can increase the frequency of cleanups from the once a month that they had traditionally done. And so we were in those conversations, and they shared with me, of course, at that time, that they really felt that this was something that the city was responsible for, that they had been doing this, though, in an effort to ensure they've got safe access to the bridge inspections. So I was open to those conversations, and we had started to talk about how would we manage the transition of this work to the city. During that time, however, we did have some emergency flooding, which strained their resources, and the timetable in which we had initially talked about transitioning the work was compressed. And so we continue to work and talk with TXDOT, and we are doing so now because we view that this work is something that needs to be addressed. Earlier this year, in January, we formed an interdepartmental team across city staff, and we talked about the challenges. This consisted of code, of health, watershed, public works, transportation. And, we certainly understand that this was an unplanned and probably a demand that was placed on us sooner than we had anticipated, but we feel strongly it needs to continue. And we'll remain in conversations with TXDOT on what we feel are the responsibilities under the existing municipal maintenance agreement.
I also want to mention in this context, just in case for folks that are watching, there was a press conference this morning where the point-in-time count numbers were announced. Councilmember Tovo and Kassar and Ellis and I were there. There are about 7,200 people every year that intersect with our support systems every year, but on any given night, that's what the point-in-time count measures, folks that are homeless in our community. The numbers in our community have gone up 5%, which is about 108 people, up to about 2,250. Our population has grown at about that same rate regionally over Travis County, 1,000 square miles over that time, which is one way to understand that number, but at the same time the number has gone up, and our goal is to end folks and the homelessness is being experienced by folks in our community. It had two really good observations. One is that the numbers of homeless vets has gone down, and really dramatic reductions in the homelessness of children. That has been really the focus over the last year. In fact, the number of homeless children 18 to 24 has gone down by 25%. And the number of homeless children who are actually on the streets has gone down by 50% over the last year. So these efforts that we do in the city when we focus attention, I think, are seeing results. The point well taken about the kind of the unfunded mandate is we take over a program from the state, and I would just point out to everyone just to remember that with respect to this expenditure and the pay for success expenditures, we're spending taxpayer dollars on things that our taxpayers want us to spend money on, because this is a priority. Our budget drivers are rising at about 3.8% year to year. That's our existing budget, no new programs. That's increases in health insurance and wages going up 3.8%. There is an effort up at the legislature to cap property tax revenue, which is the only revenue we have that can increase at greater than what is forecast 2%, because the rest of our revenue is down at that level. But if we get capped at 2.5%, we don't have enough money in our budget to be able to pay our existing cost drivers. So my hope is that the legislature does not enforce that kind of cap, because it's going to mean that we have to prioritize and stop programs that we're doing, even if we don't add programs like this. But if we want to add programs like this, then that means that there's even more cuts and difficult choices we're going to have to ultimately make. It's working its way through the legislature now. My hope is that if we have any kind of caps or caps at that level, that there are exclusions for things that are shared community values with the state, shared state priorities, like public safety. What happened outside the cap, I think, would be appropriate. Roads, that kind of stuff, and maybe this kind of expenditure as well. But at the very least, excluding things so that there's enough money within that cap to be able for us to fund what our community wants us to do with homelessness, including this program. Let me go to Jimmy and then Pio.
So just to be clear, Mayor, I don't consider this as us adding a program. This is state property that the state does not allow us to dictate, because it's state property. In fact, the city doesn't even have a majority of the votes on Campo, where state road decisions are made and funded. Yet we are going to be bearing the full cost of maintenance on these lands. So I don't see this as adding a program. I see this as the state saying, hey, you do it. It's our land. You can't do anything else. You can't build small, tiny homes under the overpasses. You can't do a little police substation. You can't do a homeless neighborhood center. You can't do anything on that land, and you have to pay to maintain it. So I don't see this as adding a program. I just wanted to add that.
Mayor, and I just,
better to say adding a cost than adding a program.
and I just want to echo that too, because I had my state rep jump all over me when we funded money to improve Lamar, North Lamar past 183 and South Congress past Ben White, and saying, why are you putting money up, fixing it and repairing the streets when it's a state responsibility? And I said, because y'all guys don't give us any funds for it. So we have to address the issues, because our residents are out there demanding that we do something for that. So it's these kind of mandates that, demands that they put on us, but, at the same time trying to restrict our funding so that we're not able to address those kind of issues, that a street that's all torn up, no sidewalks, and here we're investing our own money from the city to do the repairs, and at the same time they're trying to say, we're going to cap you at 2.5. So if they do that, I hope that they'll come back and give us some money for all the repairs and work that we have to do on their land and their property.
Kathy?
Yeah, I just was surprised, not pleasantly, to see this on our agenda. I share the concerns that Councilmember Flanagan raised. To underscore that point, I would just say it was a process and not a fast one to get permission to put a portable toilet on what is state land. And I just am so troubled by the notion that we would take on this expense. And I don't know whether, I'm not sure what the alternatives are here, or whether those are things we need to discuss in executive session rather than an open session. But, you know, one of the reasons why I'm so surprised is that TXDOT had initiated probably a year and a half ago a really useful process of pulling together stakeholders to talk about just this very issue. And Ashley Richardson on my staff participated in that. I had an opportunity to hear a TXDOT representative at one of the Ending Community Homeless Coalition membership council meetings who came and presented this issue. And then, you know, there were, I don't know, relatively maybe quarterly stakeholder meetings. As I mentioned, Ashley Richardson on my staff participated on one of those. And it was pulling together social service providers, other representatives, interested parties. I think Councilmember Houston's office participated to talk about how better and more holistically to address the issue going on under our overpasses, to try to bring services to the individuals who are sleeping there. And really the answer again and again in those conversations kept coming back to the need for more housing resources, more social service resources, and the fact that all of the organizations who were participating in those conversations, including the city, were so strapped for funds that those resources didn't exist. So for TXDOT to go from there, from doing such a proactive, holistic approach to convening those conversations, to saying, and now we're not going to continue our piece of maintaining what are our structures, is surprising and unfortunate, and I'm really, really concerned about it. And so I believe we've submitted to the council Q&A a question about where else this is taking place. Are there other places throughout the state where TXDOT has decided they're going to pass on the maintenance of their facilities to the local municipality? And if so, what are those? You mentioned the maintenance agreement. I'd like to see that. And in the fiscal note, it refers to the various city departments that are now going to be charged with identifying funds to help come up with what Councilmember Flanagan rightly said, is not a program. It's not a new program. It's someone else's expense. What are those various city departments that now are not going to be able to potentially introduce a new program, including programs that would actually make measurable, significant change in this area, like providing social services, or providing additional permanent supportive housing, or providing funding to developments like the new Salvation Army Women and Children's Shelter. So those are my concerns.
Paige.
I echo those sentiments that all of y'all have brought forward. I was just curious if you knew off the top of your head. I saw a list of like what underpasses were specifically called out for this contract, and none of them are in District 8. I didn't know if that was a matter of just copying what contracts they were letting go of, or if we are going to be expected in other areas beyond these locations to be coming up with the funding for this as well.
Certainly, Council Member. So the portion of the contract that TXDOT let expire were only for these 61 specific locations that were experiencing homeless camp environments. That was only one part of a district-wide contract that they use for right-of-way maintenance, litter, vegetation control. These locations will still receive those TXDOT services that they view as their base level of maintenance responsibilities. So that'll continue. And I did reach out to the service provider. They were only providing this type of service only at these locations within the city of Austin, nowhere else in their district, which would include some of our surrounding communities. I'll have to research if there's 20 some odd TXDOT districts throughout the state. I'll have to do some research and see if those have done similar things for other urban centers. So I don't anticipate beyond this that we're going to have to assume any additional contracts because the only portion of the work that they allowed to expire was this scope of services specific to these homeless encampments. They'll continue to do the basic litter and vegetation controls on these right-of-ways and the rest of the state-owned right-of-ways throughout our city.
Okay.
And we'll continue to be in conversation and collaboration with them. In fact, as part of the transition, I requested that they send a representative to meet with us when we have the kickoff to ensure that transition goes smoothly. And then also, I can request with them a letter explaining their position on the MMA, which they formed the basis of the decision to let this scope of work expire, and share that with council.
Thank you.
Ann?
So I would echo what my colleagues have said. I too am concerned about this kind of cost being put on the city, particularly at a time when we're talking about revenue caps. I would just also echo that. I said echo. I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to make the press conference this morning. I've always participated in the point in time count, and I think it's really an excellent way for people to really talk to folks that are living on the streets and get a real personal understanding of what's going on. So, but the point I just wanted to make is that these cleanups are really important, and so we've got to pick up the cost. I think we're all saying that, while recognizing that it's important for us to do whatever we can to work with the state to recognize that really this is a responsibility that they're pushing off on us. I would also just echo what Councilmember Tovo said and that's really that, the more we continue to work on the root of the problem, the more that will help us with these costs. When we're putting dollars into cleanups that are really just not getting at the real source of the problem, then we're using dollars in a way that we have to right now, but they're not dollars that are effective in getting people housed. So the resolution that we passed at the end of January about looking towards immediate shelters is really important, and I'm excited about us continuing with that. So those kind of programs and the other programs that we've been working on, and prevention is really where we need to focus, and that's really the best use of our dollars. So we need to continue and work on cleanups because that's critical, but I want to keep our eye on the ball that these dollars are not the most effective use of dollars in terms of really helping with the issues around homelessness.
Okay. Leslie?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm echoing everything that has been said here, but I'm also would like to see what the MMA, what the language is in there, and why they decided to reduce the scope. And in effect, what we are being asked to do here is endorse the states pushing down yet another unfunded mandate to us, because our residents want these areas to be clean and safe. And I don't understand why we are being forced to do this, but we have had so much difficulty with TXDOT getting even just getting access to the underpasses in order to move the homeless communities into safer locations. So I don't know where that happens to be at this point, and I know that Ann was working on that with TXDOT to try to get access to the different underpasses in District 5. And I've got some issues in District 7 along these lines, but I'm really just fundamentally very concerned with simply adopting yet another unfunded mandate. And our public doesn't understand that this is really TXDOT's responsibility, because we're picking it up and we're doing it for them, and we're not making any kind of protest to it. And so I guess I'm not even sure we should take this up. What would happen if we delay this and maybe have some more conversations with TXDOT and see what's in the MMA and try to understand better why yet another unfunded mandate is being pushed down to the city of Austin?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, and we did discuss that at length at the staff level. The consequence of us not entering into this contract for these services is there'll be a lapse in service because our departments don't have the internal capacity right now to conduct these cleanup with city staff and still take care of the other basic services that we provide, while we would enter into that debate, if you will, and interpretation of the municipal maintenance agreement. to have them re-enter into contracts. So it was a lapse in service, and we did discuss this at length across departments that we felt it was such a public health and safety item. APD was one of the strongest components at the table that spoke to its need because they were coordinating with TXDOT very closely to ensure that this vulnerable population was treated humanely and that they had access to services when we conducted the cleanup. So
Okay.
that's why we felt the sense of urgency to bring this up sooner.
So, colleagues, I think that, of course, there was a gap in services because our staff weren't prepared to do this because the state had been doing it. Now the state is saying, we need to do it, but they didn't. It seems like we didn't have sufficient time to even respond, and they're at the not even a negotiating table. We didn't have the opportunity, it sounds like, to push back and say, we don't have the funding for this. We don't have the programs in place. We don't have the resources. And so now we're having to run to catch up on something that was outside of what was anticipated for our program of operations for the year. And I know that Public Health and APD and the rest of our staff who were talking with TXDOT did the best they could, but they also probably were in a posture of, well, we just have to take this. We can't say no. We can't do anything to try to ensure that TXDOT continues to assume its responsibility. So I'm just having a lot of fundamental problems with not only $1.56 million going, not necessarily just going to Workquest, but that we're having to allocate this money, that we are once again being put at a disadvantage by the state. And then we're looking, as you were mentioning, Steve, about the 2.5% revenue cap. I mean, this is a program that would be very vulnerable if we don't have the additional, and we can do this because we have the additional revenues ostensibly, but if that revenue cap goes into place, we won't. So I'm wondering if this is an item that we should maybe pull from our consideration on Thursday. Just wondering.
Ann and then Jimmy.
I really appreciate the concerns you're raising because I have those concerns, but I'm very worried about the lapse in services. What's happening with us right now is we often don't have sufficient cleanups as it is.
Right.
And it is a public health and safety issue. So I appreciate what you're saying, and we're really kind of in a bind here. So I don't know what the solution might be, but I really do not want us to have a lapse in service, particularly since we're dealing with an agency where we may not have many options and may not have any quick options. The other thing my understanding is, and we would want to verify this, and I know you're going to verify this, but we've been told at times in the past that really the overpasses in our community are the only ones that TXDOT has actually been doing cleanups for. So from their perspective, they may view what they've been doing as, sort of outside the norm. So I'd like to find a solution, but I'd like to do it in a way that does not result in a lapse of service, particularly since the services and the cleanups that we've had in place have not been sufficient. They've just been as much as we could do, and they're really not often enough. So,
Jimmy.
So, Mr. Mendoza, can you remind me, I believe that state law provides that TXDOT can not do this and force it onto municipalities. Is that right?
So the state statute, as I understand it, is that once a city, a municipality incorporates an area, they take maintenance of responsibilities of all the right-of-way assets to include state-owned assets within that incorporated area. It's analogous to a neighborhood requesting to be a gated community, and then the city says, you're gated, now the streets are yours, the sidewalks are yours, unless that municipality, and this happens across the state, enters into a municipal maintenance agreement in which we request the state to support and assist the city with maintenance and operations of those state assets. And we've been entered into that municipal maintenance agreement since 1986. I've been here 2 years. I suspect why we've not updated this, because my experience in other cities is every time it's updated, it resolves in more workload on the city and less on the state. But that's the way the state statute is written, as my understanding.
Thank you. And so I think, Councilmember Kitchen, I think you kind of nailed this, and Councilmember Poole, I think we're all emotionally in agreement. It doesn't seem right. I'm ready to move forward with this because it just needs to be done. But I think it's a good conversation for us to introduce at the Campo level, because we're certainly not the only municipality in the region that is finding ourselves taxing our local jurisdictions in order to maintain public right-of-ways. And in fact, I would argue that some of our smaller jurisdictions have a greater proportional pain, because you think of a city like Cedar Park where they built 183A, so the RMA has a role to play in this conversation too. A large part of their fairly small jurisdiction is TXDOT right-of-way, and so it might even represent a larger proportion of their budget impact than it even does on us. So that's a conversation I'd like to bring up at the regional level. I also have, as we all do, get emails from folks in the community concerned about what they see under overpasses. Because my district touches Cedar Park and Round Rock, I also hear that from constituents in Cedar Park and Round Rock. So I think it's a good conversation to have at that level. And because of the state law provision, I think it's also something that we need to talk about with our state delegations and look at the Texas Municipal League and other folks to say, does that even make sense as a rule? That all being said, our local TXDOT folks, I think are great, and I enjoy working with them, and I don't think this reflects upon the local folks where we partner. This is, I think, a systemic issue that, based on an agreement from 1986, we haven't had to confront as directly as maybe other communities have. So be a more broader conversation.
Leslie.
Okay, so then just, that sounds good. I didn't know that it dated back that far, but I now have a question of why do we have such a hard time getting access under the overpasses from TXDOT in order to do the homeless cleanups in the first place, which was bedeviling the concerns down in District 5?
It's, oh, well, maybe I'm not understanding your question.
Didn't we have to do some kind of a memorandum of understanding or agreement with TXDOT a year ago or so in order for our staff to be able to go into the underpasses where the homeless were camping in order to do a cleanup?
I'm not certain about that. I think the kinds of barriers that I am remembering experiencing was more about resources and time to do it, as opposed to permission to do it. But I may be missing something. So
Okay, and my recollection is we just didn't even have the authority to go onto that property because it wasn't city property; it was state property.
I think you. I don't know. Others may be more familiar with that than me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Jimmy was working. It was that we had to get, the police officers could not go, and I'm sorry, they couldn't go and question the individuals that were in there because they were in private property. So, but I think there's an agreement now, mutual understanding that we can do that.
All right, so the state statute didn't extend to that activity. Okay, so then I would just wrap up by saying I think this would be a great item to put on our 2021 legislative agenda and do whatever work is necessary in the ensuing time to get something like this with the Municipal League and the urban counties and the rest to see if we can't affect some better responsibility at the state level for these efforts.
Kathy. Speaker.
I'm just not ready to concede our need to take this on, though I completely agree with the need to continue the service. And I want to be very clear. Especially I want to be clear because the memo, I think, identified District 5 and one other district as being the source of concerns about this, and as probably the CAFs that my office has forwarded will indicate. Certainly I hear lots of concerns from constituents in District 9. We have lots of overpasses that generate concern among District 9 constituents and others who write about District 9 overpasses. But I guess what I'm confused about now is that we have a state statute that says one thing, but as I understand it, the maintenance agreement that you've referenced modifies that provision. And so this state maintenance agreement that I'm going to ask for through the Q&A from 1986, is it still in place? And why would we amend it? I guess that's really the fundamental question I have for our legal staff. Why would we amend it if we have a legal agreement with them that they're going to maintain the overpasses in this way? That's our document.
Yes, we do have a maintenance agreement, and it still is in effect. It's been amended because over time, certain state routes have been added and certain routes have been taken off their system. An example, Cesar Chavez, that was taken off the system, so it was amended in 2003 or 4-ish to reflect that. but the specific terms in terms of who's responsible for what specific maintenance activities, street sweeping, pavement repairs, lane striping, crosswalks, litter control, vegetation, those have been in place since that time. We have been in conversations with them to update that municipal maintenance agreement to better reflect, the current mode of operations for both the city and the state. But this crosses multiple departments, and I have been working with my colleagues to develop a matrix of responsibilities by state asset, which we're comfortable and we would propose going back to them to update. But yes, that maintenance agreement is in place that allows TXDOT to come and perform, believe it or not, maintenance and repair and spend money on their own assets. So that's why we have it in place.
I have some more questions, but I'll leave it for now and address them outside. Thanks.